soon as I let the other two in. So Dr. Dick Elgin is a rare surveyor, a practitioner having owned and operated a surveying and mapping firm for 24 years, sealing about 15,000 surveys. He's an author of most recently written the U.S. Public Land Survey System for Missouri and the Repair and Boundaries for Arkansas. He's an educator, being an adjunct professor emeritus of surveying at Missouri University of Science and Technology, a researcher, being the co-author of the Lights Sokia Ephemeris and a co-developer of the Astro Celestial Observation Software, a collector owning one of the largest private collections of American surveying equipment in the United States, which he had done a nice publication or a nice presentation on that about 2 months ago. So Dr. Elgin, we appreciate your time again, and it's definitely a well-perceived topic tonight. So this should be a great discussion. Thank you for your time.
Sure. Well, thanks, Trent, for the introduction. And only my students refer to me as Dr. Elgin. To everybody else, I'm Dick. So
I know,
please, and some of my students don't. They call me things other than Dr. Elgin. Dick is the preferred. I'm coming to you all from Rolla, Missouri, which is one of two, if you've never been to Rolla. The USGS has two geospatial technical centers. There's one in Denver, and there's one right down the road here from me in Rolla. And of course, there's a branch of the university is here. Essentially, the engineering school for the University of Missouri system is here. The Forest Service, all the Forest Service operations in Missouri is here. The Missouri Land Survey, the state agency, the state repository for all surveys, is also here in Rolla. So I'm in South Central Missouri this afternoon. As Trent mentioned, and I mentioned just a minute ago, I co-authored the Lights and Sokia Ephemerides, and the first one was 1985, the last one was 2008. And then also, as he mentioned, but since I have a captive audience, here's the Public Lands tome for Missouri, the Public Land Survey System for Missouri, about 250 pages, everything you wanted to know, and then some about the Public Land Survey System for Missouri, which it turns out is different. Missouri and Arkansas are different, having been done fairly early in the system. The instructions are 1815. Our system is different than the later state because we have so-called double corners on every township exterior in Missouri and Arkansas. And then also I wrote the Repair and Boundaries for Arkansas, about 300 pages, much more about riparian boundaries than probably what you want to know. But as Trent mentioned, been in practice for many, many years, and I am semi-retired now, but I still work for Archer Elgin Engineering and Surveying here in Rolla. So this evening or this afternoon, I'm going to talk about surveyor's notes for plats. These notes, and there's a batch of them, and you all have the handouts or my overheads here. You all have hard copies, or you have a set of the notes there. So what I've compiled here is a set of notes to go on plats, and I don't know, I don't have them numbered, but there's probably, I don't know, 20 or 25 notes here. And of course, not all are used on every plat, as we'll see here in a minute, but you can select, if you like, from these notes to go on the plat, which further explains the survey. It's impossible to show graphically everything that probably we surveyors would like to tell the user about the survey. And so hence we have notes to further explain the survey. Usually on Alta surveys, there's going to be a few more notes than on a regular boundary survey. So we can explain further to the user what the survey is and what the survey isn't. And some of these notes, it has more to do with what the survey is not than what the survey is. But we don't want the user to be misled, or the user, of course, is not sometimes or not knowledgeable about the survey and what it is and what it isn't. So it's kind of a way of educating the user about the survey. The other thing is, in my practice, I have done some expert witness work, usually in the defense of surveyors and engineers. And in some of the plats, it would have been helpful to the defense to help defend the surveyor if they had adopted or used some of these notes, and I can point some of them out to you, because the user or some third party thinks or believes there's more to the survey than what there actually is. And if some of these notes had been used, well, it would certainly make the defending of the surveyor much easier. And perhaps in some case, had some of these notes been used, well, the surveyor wouldn't be a defendant in the case anyway. So these notes are copied right out of our Word file where we keep all these notes and add them to plats every day. So these have been written. Some of these are pretty specific for Missouri, as I'll show you. So what you need to do if you want to adopt some of these is, rewrite them for yourself, which is no big deal. I mean, you can adapt these to your practice as you see fit. So with that, I'll kind of go through these. There's no need of me reading each one of these to you, but I'll kind of paraphrase it a little bit and then talk some about it. And these are probably some version of what you already have in your office. There might be some new twists here that you hadn't thought about, but these are based on my developing these over a period of 25 years or so. As we, you think you've been at it a long time and you think you've seen it all. There's going to be nothing new in the next survey, and then the next survey there's some wrinkle pops up, or some third-party user has dreamed up something about the survey. So some of these notes are fairly new because, like I say, you never know it all. And you all probably have notes that, if you'd like to share with the group sometime or publish them where they've covered a situation in your practice, that'd be great. Some of these notes I've gotten from as I'm out doing seminars, or some states have plat contests, which are really, really, really effective. So at the state surveyor convention, they put up plats and judge the plats, and so I like to look at those. There's nothing wrong with stealing a good idea from somebody else. So some of these are. This is kind of a compilation of my notes that we use, plus other notes that I've seen others use. So the first one there is kind of long-winded. I won't read it, but that's kind of a general note that says, well, it starts by telling the user some of the things that the survey is not. For example, this plat may not show all record easements, easements other than maybe perhaps those that are visible from the ground. Typically, on some of our surveys, we don't show building setback lines, depending on what the contractual requirements are. In Missouri, there's no minimum standards requirement for that. We don't show subdivision restrictions and covenants. Zoning is not typically shown. So this is kind of a general catch-all statement that go on most of our boundary surveys about what the survey does not show. And then at the very end there, I like to twist this around on the title companies a little bit. The title companies issue their title policies, and then at the end, they accept anything that would be shown on a complete and accurate survey or something like that. So their catch-all is to, well, if it wouldn't show on a survey, then we're not responsible for it. So the very last statement there, I kind of like to turn that around on the title company and any other facts which an accurate and current title search might show. So kind of a general statement that goes on all of our surveys. The next one, this is a requirement in Missouri. You have to make a statement that the survey meets the current Missouri survey standards. And the 20 CSR, that's our rule number that I put in there. Your state probably has some similar requirement. If there's not a requirement where you have to say that it meets the standards, I'd highly recommend that you make a statement on there that yes, it does meet the standards. And then in some defense situation, perhaps there's no question about it. Well, now, Mr. and Mrs. Surveyor, does this survey meet the standards? Well, of course it meets the standards. Well, it doesn't say it meets the standards. So if your state doesn't require it, I'd recommend putting a statement such as that on there. In Missouri, probably as your state does, there are accuracy requirements depending on what the land classification is. In our state, we have rural, suburban, and urban, and there are measurement requirements. And so again, it's a requirement in Missouri that you state to which land classification is the survey made in. Let's see, Trent, as we go along, if there are questions, we're going to jump in here, unmute and fire off with the question. Sure. Yes, sir.
Go for it, James.
Dick, does in Missouri you have that that note on standards? We have the same thing here in Washington, basically. But have you ever been asked to prove those standards? Prove that your survey meets those standards?
To prove that it does?
Yes.
You mean like in a litigation situation?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
No, I've never been asked that question. It's not been a point in the cases that I've worked on. Now, I spent 8 years on the Missouri Licensing Board, and sometimes there's a question, well, there's been some complaint, and so the question may be, well, does this survey meet minimum standards? So that might be a question there, but I've never been asked that on the stand or asked to prove it. But you know, I'd be happy to, I would say, well, the plat says that it meets the standards, and we can go down the list if you'd like, Mr. Attorney, and show that. But no, I've never been asked that in a litigation situation.
Maybe I'm just a little paranoid, but I always make sure that I hang on to my my calculations and stuff just for that reason.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next one there is the field date, or the last field date. We put that on all of our drawings, or if there's multiple field dates, if it doesn't get too crazy, you know, this survey was done during the month of June, last field date was June 24th or whatever. And in Missouri, that's a minimum standards requirement. You have to put on there what the field dates were. And I think that's good practice. Particularly if you're revising a survey of some type or redoing a survey, to put the last field date on there, I think could just be plain old good practice. The next one there, again, is a Missouri minimum standards requirement. If you're doing a resurvey of lands, you have to put the book and page or document number that contains the description of the lands which you are surveying. And I think that's good practice. How often have you picked up a plat and looked at it of what somebody was doing, perhaps an old plat, and you say, what in the world was this person doing? Or you say, well, was this a resurvey, or did this person create, is it original survey? You know, what's going on here? What was the purpose? And in some, you can't tell. And except for a statement on there that it's either a resurvey or original survey, you can't tell. So if it's a resurvey of a plat for which a document exists, you have to say so. The corollary to that is, well, if it's an original survey, then in Missouri, and I think it's good practice, you have to say, well, what's the parent deed? Out of what document did this new parcel come from? And I think those are good practices because it answers the question. Is this a resurvey or is it your original survey? Which sometimes is an important question, which sometimes on old surveys, you can't tell by looking at them. And let's see, so while we're talking about that, in our world, in my world, there's, it's been around for quite some years, but well, do you re-describe, you're doing a resurvey on a parcel. Do you re-describe that parcel or do you leave that record description alone? Well, as probably everybody on this webinar knows, sometimes the title company or the seller or the buyer's attorney, they just want to leave that old description alone. And then they'll say, well, that preserves title identity. To which I say, oh, poo, it doesn't have much to do with title identity. If we're resurveying the parcel, chances are the old description does not best memorialize the boundary locations. Probably the new measurements, call for adjoiners, monumentation, acreage, those things are probably not, some of those things may not be referred to in the record description. So let's incorporate that new information about the location of the boundaries and let's write a new description for the parcel. So our practice has become to, if we're doing a resurvey, we put the new measured resurveyed description on the plat. And then to satisfy some title folks that don't want to use that or think that it's destroying this title identity, we put the record description also on the plat. So there's two descriptions. There's the old reference to some book and page or document number, and then the new survey description. And then with that, whatever the title company or the buyer or the seller or the lender's attorneys wants to do with it, if they want to use the new description, fine. If they want to use the old one, well, that's kind of their choice. But I think as a professional surveyor, we've done our best job by putting both the record description and the new measure description on the plat. We can't control their business. And I know some minimum standards require a new description in the case of course, an original survey, or in the case of a resurvey, you have to put the new description on there. So to placate the title industry a little bit, perhaps regurgitating the record description is not such a bad alternative. We particularly run across that on Alta surveys, where you get some sophisticated attorney or some attorney that thinks he or she is pretty sophisticated and demands that record description be on there. Okay, I'm not going to argue with them about that. I'm going to put the record description on there along with our new survey description. Like I say, I think we've done our best job when we've done that. Let's see, the next one here about the flood hazard area. That used to be a big thing in our part of the world. It's not anymore. Lenders, realtors, there's good FEMA mapping out there online. So this statement about is it in or is it out of some flood hazard area is not such a big deal, but there's our note. And occasionally still we use it and we refer to some firm map, which is common in our kind of rural area. Another statement there, the dimensions shown are all measured. If you want the record dimensions, go look at the documents noted. Our standards say that if the measured dimension, if there's a material difference in the measured dimension and a record dimension, you have to show both. Oh boy, ugh. You know, I cringe when we show both. You know, in some cases, we've confused the public enough, or we've confused the title industry enough with changing, you know, the deed says you go east, but our new survey says you go north 89, 59, 20 east. You know, you don't go east. And they say, well, it says you go east, but on your plat, you don't show east. So then you got to explain that to them. Well, we've all been there before, and of course, there's good explanations for that. But the title industry, and then what if there's 2 or 3 or 4 record dimensions? You know, you come in with your new shiny measured, and there might be 4 deeds that have different dimensions. So you're going to put all those on there. Oh, it just grinds me when we confuse the public and the title industry with too many dimensions. So my kind of way of kind of catch all, get around that is everything on here is measured for the record information, see the documents noted, or quote some former book and page or something like that. We probably ought to point out a distinction when they're large, and this is kind of my way of doing it. The next one here goes on just about all of our surveys. Only the record documents noted hereon were provided or discovered. No abstract, current title commitment, or other record title documents were provided to the surveyor. That's a real good statement. I would recommend it to you all. And the purpose is, and I have defended surveyors where the situation was there was a record document. Most recently, there was a record easement, which had a large impact on the survey, but the surveyor didn't know anything about the record easement. You know, he was provided a batch of documents and he did his usual research. There was nothing on the ground to indicate that this easement, a utility easement, there was anything in it. And so he didn't know anything about it. He didn't showed it. Turned out for the development of the parcel, it was important, and he ended up as a defendant. And he said, well, wait a minute, you know, I put everything on there that I knew about. And they say, yeah, but that doesn't matter. You know, you missed this one. Well, how was I supposed to know about that one? Well, of course, the plaintiff had a reason for why he should have known about it. But this kind of a statement would help defend the surveyor. And this is the usual situation. You know, usually we show everything of record that we know about, but might there be some oddball record easement out there that would affect the development of the parcel? Sure, you know, there might be. And so hopefully with this statement on there, you know, we can warn folks that there may be other title documents that might have something to do with it. In the case of an Alta survey, probably not, but for most other surveys, yeah, there could be some record document out there that would affect it. So this could, I think this statement helps that. And I say here, you know, I mentioned an abstract. Well, abstracts, you know, those are a thing of the past in our part of the world. And to get a current title commitment on a usual boundary survey where you're doing a resurvey of some type, typically, you know, they're not available. So to think that you have all the record documents that affect the tract, probably not true. Here's a statement we put on most surveys. There may be structure improvements located which are not shown, particularly if it's a fairly large boundary survey, and there's a lot of structures on there, houses, outbuildings, and we don't know quite what the purpose of the survey is. They want a boundary survey, but maybe showing those improvements is important to some buyer or some third party. So if the place is really cluttered with structures and improvements, we put this statement on there. This plat does not represent an Alta NSPS land title survey. We're doing a big fancy site survey, a boundary, and a 3D site survey, but it's not an Alta. Looks like an Alta, perhaps, to some people. Then we put this on there. This is not an Alta. Don't want somebody thinking or using it as an Alta if it's not. The next one here is kind of a catch-all where we think there might be some underground facilities, environmental hazards of some type. storage tanks. Maybe it was former site of a filling station that's just been cleared off or something. So if we think there's might be anything on there, we put this statement on. And of course, now this is, that work right there that we're talking about. I mean, that's a phase 1 environmental audit these days, or maybe a phase 2 if you have to dig in the ground or whatever. So just a general statement, if the user needs to be warned that there might be something out there. Tract is zone, we put that on practically all of our surveys. In the area we work, it's easy to tell. There's good online zoning mapping. And so to add how the tract is zoned, typical part of our surveys. Wholly within the corporate limits of, particularly if it is within the corporate limits, or if it's on the edge somewhere, if we can tell, and usually we do, we put that on there. Vertical datums, there's so many vertical datums floating around today that to positively state what it is, I think is good practice. Underground utilities exist, but the location of these facilities are not within our scope. If it's a fairly large site, perhaps, or it's going to be developed commercially, or maybe a residential area, maybe a subdivision, and we suspect that there's utilities in there, but we're just doing a boundary survey to say that, well, there might be, particularly if we know there are. I think this is a good statement to put on there. Again, not knowing what the third or fourth or fifth party knows about the land that's going to be used in your survey, which may be, years after the survey was done. There may be buried utilities. You may have an occasion to put that on there. This next, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, yeah.
No,
Just
go
one
ahead.
more thing. I saw your vertical datum, and I agree with you 100% on that. Do you ever reference your horizontal datum?
Yes. Of course, that's a little more hidden than, of course, these days ours are state plane, but if we're publishing coordinates, then the answer would be yes, definitely.
Okay.
And typically, of course, if we're publishing coordinates in our world, they're state plane. So yes, if you're publishing coordinates, yeah, you better state what the datum is. We have corner registration on our public land, corner registration requirements on our public land survey corners. And there's not a requirement yet that you put horizontal datum or state plane on them. But if you state what the horizontal coordinates are, then yes, you have to also state the datum, which again, these days we got, well, too many horizontal datums, just like vertical datums. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. The next one here is good statement. This goes on all of our site surveys. It goes on all of our Altas, both 2D and 3D Altas. We dig right the area. They come in and they kind of do the dig right people kind of do a so location. We talk to the local utility companies. We get mapping. If it's a Alta or big site survey, we do everything we can to locate all the utilities. Of course, we're on the ground. We're looking, we're watching for manholes, we're watching for valve boxes. Typically, we connect the dots between these manholes, if they're sanitary sewer or storm sewer or a fire hydrant, water valve boxes. We dash the lines in as to what they are. I know some companies don't. They show the at-grade appurtenances, but don't show any of the underground. We show the underground, and we, of course, if that's part of the survey, of course, that's part of the purpose. So the designers, the site civil engineers can design to those things. I mean, we do our usual good, best professional, provide our best professional service. But then in the end, do you have everything? Have you located everything? Might there be something else out there? Well, we don't really know. And so this is our standard statement that we put on all of our site surveys. And it says there no excavations were made, and typically they're not for some of the things that we do. Some are potholed, but typically we don't do excavations. So there's the caveat to our utility locates. And then we list, you have questions, call the Department of Public Works, and here's their email, and here's their phone number, or the electric company, or we list, or the city list all the utility providers that have utility services on the track that we know of. And typically, of course, we do, and you all would as well. So then we list the names, emails, phone numbers, and addresses of everybody that we know is in there. Let's see, there may be easements which affect the land shown here on. I've kind of talked about that already. Our minimum standards require that if we have a record document to an easement, we have to show it. And I think that's a good rule. In a subdivision, of course, in a residential or commercial subdivision, the dedicated easements, of course, show on our plats, and any other record easements that we're aware of, we put on there. But again, is that all of them? Well, no, there may be other other record easements other than that are shown that affect the property. And I think that's a real good note to put on there. And one of these last cases that I worked on, had there been a notes of this type, perhaps the surveyor wouldn't be a defendant. Prior to any excavations, you've got to do your own dig right. That's a requirement, Missouri statute, turns out, in Missouri, and we give the dig right numbers or whatever the utility locate folks are. The next one down here is a good one that I dreamed up not too many years ago. In our area, I'm in rural southern Missouri, and if you're going to put a septic tank on a rural tract, DNR says it has to be 5 acres. And so what we get into is, Grandpa owns 160 acres, and he's got to give the knucklehead grandchild, enough room to put his double wide trailer out there. And so we go out to survey off the double wide trailer, and the grandpa says, now I'm going to give that knucklehead grandson, I'm going to give him 100 by 100 square up here in the corner. Well, that's fine, Grandpa. Is he going to have his own well? Yeah, the knucklehead is going to have to dig his own well. What about the septic tank? Well, we're going to run it out in the ditch. Well, no, Grandpa, you can't put it in the ditch. Well, I guess you'll have to have the septic tank. Well, now, Grandpa, if it's going to be a septic tank, you got to have 5 acres. I'm not giving a knucklehead no 5 acres. Forget that. Lay out the 100 by 100 and go home. So, well, we do, but then Grandpa gets this note on there, and it says, well, Grandpa wanted it to be 100 by 100, and this may cause you problems. And eventually, of course, with lenders, and it'll cause a problem eventually. And of course, there's ways around it, easements and this and that. But anyway, this is a note that's that we put on there. It says, well, this is what the owner wanted, and whether this meets all DNR requirements and county health departments, we don't know. So that's our way around helping out Grandpa. And then the other one, this is kind of the corollary to that. We go out and do a survey. We create a parcel, or for a lender, or any number of reasons. And it's in a rural area. And, this 5 acre deal, there are setback sideline requirements on lagoons and on septic tanks, and there's spacing between wells and septic tanks in our area. There's all of this geometry that goes along with the water and sewer provisions for this house out in the rural area. And some of those are pretty large requirements. Well, again, we don't check those. We don't know if the septic tank spacing with the well and the house and the property lines are okay or not. So we say, well, we don't know if this meets these applicable guidelines or not. So we put this on there to kind of cover ourselves. It's never, well, it's just, I think it's a good note to put on there in our area anyway. And well, you all in the urban areas, perhaps not, but in our rural areas, it's an issue here in southern Missouri. See the applicable codes for conditions that might develop the tract. We put that on all of our site surveys. It looks like some consulting engineering company is going to design something on there. You know, they need to be looking at those codes, so we put that on there. Here's another one that is a bit troublesome. It can be troublesome in our area. In our area, there are a lot of absentee owners, or there are a lot of large tracts, 800 acres, 500 acres, rural tracts, which are served by state routes, state highways, state right-of-ways. But then the seller or the developer cuts them up into 10-acre pieces or 20-acre pieces or 40-acre tracts. And in rural southern Missouri, in the Ozarks, some of the access, some of the driveway locations, the driveway to these parcels, those locations are permitted by the highway department. And so site distances can be a problem for some of these parcels. Now you'd think if you had a 10-acre piece that fronted on a state route, there would be some place where you could get a driveway entrance in. Well, no, not necessarily. And so we don't go out and meet with the highway department to get driveway entrances pre-approved or pre-permitted. We don't do that. You know, we lay out the piece in these big parcels. You know, we look at it. There's probably a location where the site distances are such that a driveway is going to be permitted. But in our area, the highway department is trying to cut down on these driveway entrances, the number of them and the spacing on them. To have two of them right together, forget it. It ain't going to happen. You know, there has to be spacing between these. So it's become kind of an issue. And so, you know, we cut it up into the parcels, and then we put this note on there that says, hey, you know, we're not guaranteeing that all the MoDOT in our case is going to permit all these driveway locations or not. It has been a trouble. So we try to point it out to the realtor developer so they can be thinking about it, but none of them have ever said, oh, well, okay, why don't you go out and help us get pre-approved driveway entrances permitted. Nobody's ever asked us to do that yet. So they get this note instead. Let's see, this next note is trouble. We wrote the note to get rid of the trouble. You know, you develop a plat and you create a proposed easement. Maybe you cut out a parcel and then you show an easement across the parcel to get to some piece in the back. Well, you look at the plat and here's the survey of the parcel, and then here's this easement, and here's the easement description. Well, so you might think to yourself, well, wait a minute, is that an existing easement or is that some proposed easement? Was it created as a part of this survey, or was it, is there some record document that gives this parcel in the back the easement? Well, that can be a good question. And, you know, to us, it's simple. We know the answer, but to some second or third party or some lender, you know, down the road, perhaps sometime later, you can't tell by looking at the plat what it is. So we put this note on there. The easement shown and described is proposed. This easement is not conveyed or created by virtue of the plat. A deed will need to be executed by the current owner to convey the right. Another thing, sometimes folks look at these easements and they say, oh, by virtue of this plat, it creates the easement. No, this isn't a subdivision plat with a dedication on it. You know, we just wrote a description for the center line of the road to get to the parcel in the back. So no, the plat itself doesn't create it. And so we put this note on there to point that out. The next one there has to do with wetlands. That used to be a big deal in our area, but now the DNR, the environmental quality people, have got that all under control. We don't have any more questions about wetlands. Now here's a big one that I wrote this note after we got folks were pointing fingers at us. We did a large site survey, 3D site survey for a large commercial development. And we, of course, the survey and the site part and the contours, I mean, they had to do with the parcel itself with a little overage. Well, there was a drainage area that came onto the part that we surveyed. And we didn't, of course, we didn't survey the off-site drainage area, which was huge, by the way. And we didn't note it that, oh, by the way, you know, there's 40 acres of drainage, you know, coming onto this tract at these points. And we didn't calculate the queue, you know, that are coming onto the parcel. And so the consulting engineers designed this facility, and they weren't from around here. Matter of fact, they were from out of state. And they got done with the facility, and there were drainage issues within the structures within the facility, because all this water was coming onto the site that the designers hadn't accounted for. And so there were drainage issues and we had to get that all straightened out. Well, the designers were pointing the finger at us as saying, well, now wait a minute, you know, you didn't warn us that there was this offsite drainage coming on. And, you know, I felt like saying, good Lord, you know, have you got Google Map? You know, have you got Google imagery? If you got any imagery at all? Oh, you were supposed to warn us of that. Well, I don't think so. And so anyway, it got put to bed. And then also, of course, with stormwater detention and retention for a development like that on the site, the downstream people are not at too much risk, but perhaps they are. But then this note also covers the downstream. You know, there may be owners or structures or features downstream that the designer sure needs to think about or look at perhaps that aren't shown on the survey. And those structures could be a long ways downstream, of course, as you and I know. So now we add this note that says, hey, designers, you know, you need to think about what's upstream and what's downstream from this site that you're designing on that, you know, we don't show. Now we can go help you figure it out if you want to, but this is our note to kind of protect us from kind of misuse of the survey because of upstream and downstream drainage areas. The next one there is, again, to keep you from getting caught. The situation on this one, what generated this note was we had done a plat on a bunch of storage units. And these were expensive, large storage units. And the land area was owned by a corporation. And this was a big deal, big, expensive storage units. Well, so they've been in operation for a while. And then they said, well, Dick, the partners, we're gonna split up these storage units. And, you know, person A is going to take this group and person B over here and person C over here. Now, this is all inside our little group here. And so we just want you to write some descriptions of these parcels so we could straighten up this ownership. And I said, well, now, that sounds like a subdivision to me. You're going to rearrange the ownership in here. Oh, no, it's just, and we got to do some deeds of trust. We got to fix some deeds of trust. We're going to trade some stuff back and forth. We just need these boundary descriptions. Well, it kind of looked like, act like, smelled like a subdivision to me, but we prepared the descriptions, put a great big disclaimer on it. This is for fixing deeds of trust or whatever. Well, so sure enough, then one of them goes to the city to get some permit to build or change something. And the city looks at their record plat. And of course, what they got in their GIS system doesn't look anything like, what the ownership is. And then they say, well, wait a minute, you guys have illegally subdivided this. And then of course it was trouble and we had to get in there and fix the thing. So I've gotten, with that bad experience, I don't think we've done one of those since, but we put little notes on what we did in that case to say essentially, well, this is not a boundary of record. It hasn't been, these tracts have not gone through city planning and zoning or any kind of a review process. So something to think about and apply in your world, perhaps. Let me see now. Okay. This is an Alta survey. We put this on all of them on NSPS, Alta survey, land tile survey. And I say here, the whole purpose of an Alta is to lift the exceptions off the title commitment. And so I say that. As a matter of fact, that's in the preamble of the Alta NSPS standards. And, it's not for engineering design. It's not for some architectural design, and how many times 3 or 4, 5, 10 years down the road does some subsequent owner call up and they want you to email the survey to their designer. Well, what are you doing? Well, we're going to expand this thing. Well, now the survey you're talking about was an Alta survey. They don't know what that is. Maybe you're talking to the architect. He or she doesn't know what that is. And so we say, well, now, wait a minute now, that really wasn't the purpose. And then of course, there's a whole series of questions and problems that come from that. But we put this note on there to remind folks downstream that, hey, this is an Alta survey. It's not a design survey. Acreage shown includes the right-of-way for, in our area, there are a lot of county roads that are by prescription. The county has no deed to them. That's not true for state routes, but for county routes. And so, we survey, the section line, for example, is probably out in the middle of the road someplace, but it's a county road and the road is by prescription. So sometimes we put the acreage out to that line, but then we say, well, but now wait a minute, this quarter, nominal quarter, whatever it is, 40.26 acres or whatever, that includes right of way that's within this county road that's shown on the drawing. So we draw a distinction between the acreage shown on the plat and perhaps some of that acreage that's within some prescriptive county road. The third one down there, and I'm about to run out of time, the third one down there, this is our car wash note. Here, a while back, we did a bunch of surveys on car washes. And, if you do a car wash, you try to trace all those drains around, and these drains, they disappear. You can't tell where they went. So you ask the owner, I said, well, now those drains, did they go in the sewer system? And of course, they're not supposed to go in the sewer system, and they're not supposed to go in the storm sewer system either. And so that's when the owner gets real kind of clams up. You never know where the water from car wash drains go. And so we've developed this note. The extent of the drainage system here is, we don't know what it is. There aren't any as-built. You all figure it out. So that's our car wash note. The last one there, no big consequence. The top one here, that's an Alta note about work shown. Let's see here. Oh, wait a minute. I think I misspoke. Here's the note about the, yeah, here's the note about the drawings. I got in a hurry back there a minute ago. This is the note that says about the driveway permits. And then the last one down here, and then I think we'll have time for some questions if y'all have it. And then there's a whole nother body of notes that have to do with riparian tracks. You know, you do a survey along a river. Well, the number one question is the river navigable for tidal or not navigable for tidal? Because if it's navigable for tidal, the boundary is going to be at one place. If it's non-navigable, it's going to be someplace else. If it's navigable for tidal, it's probably either ordinary high water line or low water line, one or the other. There are some exceptions to that, but it's probably one of those. So, okay, so you're surveying. So how do you know if it's navigable or non-navigable? Does that deserve a note? Yeah, probably so. What about the acreage of that parcel? If you don't know if it's navigable or non-navigable, and if there's a minimum requirement, minimum standards requirement that the acreage be shown, what are you going to say about the acreage? Into what line are you going to compute it? So there's a whole set, there's a whole nother, Trent, there's a whole nother hour on notes for riparian surveys. But that's well, riparian boundaries for that matter. You can't come close to covering that in an hour.
No,
but,
yeah.
But specialized notes for riparian surveys, I think would be a good topic and an important one. So with that, it's on the hour. So let's see, Trent, should we field some questions? I'd be happy to try.
Yeah, absolutely. And anybody can unmute themselves and ask a question. So, you know, some of this was kind of today's topic was designed to keep your surveys defendable from courts. And so, you know, is there certain ones that you guys are using as a group here that we can share with everybody? And when I do this follow-up email that you guys will all be on, you can kind of, if you got some of your favorite notes, we can kind of compile some stuff and share it with everybody. So we can go with that too. But I saw James had his hand up, so go for it, James.
I promise I'll shut up after this.
Oh, you're fine. You
were talking a couple slides back. You were talking about the you had that note about easements, and that there could be some easements there that are not, you don't have the paperwork for. Have you been, this just happened to me not too long ago, is that we're out on a site and could not find anything about titles, but there was a power line running right through the property. And you knew something had to be there, but you couldn't find any evidence of it. You see, you couldn't find any title evidence of an easement of that, but you see the property line, I mean, the power lines are going right through the property. So, what I did is I located them and I said, here's where they are, but we cannot find any evidence of a easement. And that's just about all I could do.
Yep. I'd say you've done the right thing. Missouri standards would be that you'd be obligated to show that power line. If there's, I can't quote you exactly what it says, but if you discover something substantial on the property, albeit not in a recorded easement, you're obligated to show whatever that is. And that would include access roads going across it to get to other parcels, power lines, those kinds of things. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Good. George, was that a hand up or just a clap?
It was a hand up.
Okay, go for it.
Regarding the engineer that designed the project that didn't pay attention to drainage, wouldn't a competent engineer visit the site at least once? I mean, come on. We're not going to topo everything uphill of the site that we're topoing. We're not going to topo everything downhill. I mean, there's limits to everything, except an engineer's liability, evidently.
Kind of a little bit of the rest of the story was the facility that was being built was for a national chain that had A&E firms that did work for them. And the A&E firms, you know, they were on the East Coast. Of course, I'm sitting in Missouri. So this big A&E firm that did the design, we never got to it. We never went to the mat on it. The thing all got kind of fixed. But early in the game, as sometimes there's a lot of finger pointing went on, and they were certainly kind of pointing the finger our direction. It had a good outcome. They went back and fixed some stuff, and the contractor got in there and routed some water so it wasn't running in the front door. But they rerouted some water, and it got taken care of. But it made me nervous with the early finger pointing.
Yeah, I can imagine. Here in Las Vegas Valley, we do 100-foot overlap as part of our topographic.
Wow.
Design. Yeah.
Ooh.
It's a county requirement, and then
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, add 100 feet to another, half-acre parcel or whatever. So
Yeah.
turns them into good surveys, but it gives them that overlap and gives them that upstream and downstream stuff they'll see. So
Yeah.
go for it. The Scooter.
We typically,
I guess
Oh,
two
one
notes
second,
that we
George.
see that are standard are, a bearing basis, whether the bearings of your survey is based on a survey of record or GPS observations or solar astronomic observations. And then same with the units of measure, particularly now with all the US survey foot and international foot that's stated in a note about the bearing basis and units of linear measure.
Yeah, our standards are, and I'm licensed in 4 states, and those 4 states are the same way. You can use any bearing base you want. You just got to say what it is, which is fine.
Yeah.
But typically with GPS, of course, we shoot everything. It's just easiest to make it all stay plain grid.
Right, but in our practice, it's all got to be true bearings. And, I've just seen some atrocious notes just like that. A bearing basis is GPS. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well,
grid projection, or is it, a true bearing derived from?
Yeah. Well, our standard note is it's stay plane grid. And it's derived from GPS, but I mean, it's a state plane coordinate grid direction. It's not true. It's not astronomic. I mean, it's a grid direction. They can argue about, well, how did you get there? But it's a state plane grid direction as opposed to a record or celestial observation or something else.
Hey, Dick, Rob McMillan here. When you use that statement, do you give a pair of record monuments like NGS marks that you have some bearing on?
No, it's all, of course, GPS derived, and we, our standard, and never been called on it, is just that these are state plane grid directions, period.
California would have a heyday with that.
Oh, they would? Oh,
Yeah,
California.
so.
California.
Sorry
also,
for you guys.
Yeah. Also, I was going to say,
wouldn't have added,
yeah.
You're still in Alaska.
You talked
Oh.
about not showing like record and measured, right? In California, you may have a stack of like 15 recorded and measured on one line.
That, yeah, I would argue that it can't be helpful to anybody.
Right.
I don't see why.
Yeah, Mr. Parrish, go for it. And then George, I think I cut you off too soon, but
That's all right.
okay.
We're fine.
Okay, cool. Go for it, Steve.
Hey, 2 questions, Dr. Elgin. When was Missouri completely surveyed by the GLO? What's your last by the GLO, not the BLM in and out there?
Yeah. Well, here now, I'm glad you asked that, Steve. Here, let me sell you a copy of my book.
I want one of them.
But the long and the short of it is, Missouri and Arkansas were surveyed under Tiffin's instructions of 1815, which leave a lot to be desired. It's true. And Missouri was done by 1845. So Missouri was completely done 1845. No solar compasses in Missouri. And it was all done under those instructions. And when you read those Tiffin's instructions, of course, they leave a whole lot to be desired.
Okay, secondly, USGS field sheets. I know that west of the Mississippi, they used to be all housed over in Denver, Colorado. And now I understand they're in the east of the Mississippi in Rolla, Missouri. Are they protecting, or the USGS protecting those field sheets that shows what corners they do find and the data on them, and even maybe the resource photography that maybe went along with it that has some great data on the back? Are they making efforts to save those in Rolla via USGS?
The answer is I'm not completely sure about that, Steve. Of course, the USGS mission here has changed. I mean, they're counting bugs and measuring water, more than doing mapping. But yeah, those field sheets and the associated imagery that goes with it is a big deal. But I'm not sure on what the status of that is. Now they have a big repository building here, and hopefully, that hasn't been stored digitally somehow is sitting in that big vault that's just down the street from me here.
Which I was lucky enough to go in when I came back to your class. That was cool. Any more specific questions?
To help Steve out, since he's a historian and an old guy like me, the USGS here stored those copper plates that were engraved, that they were printed from. And several years ago, they auctioned a whole bunch of those things off. So, what a treasure to have one of those, 7.5 minute multiple copper plates with the engraving on them. They have a small museum here at their facility in Rolla where some of those are laid out. They're beautiful, of course.
I know the trouble we ran across in Denver one time, we'd used the mapping photography, aerial photographs and everything a number of times out of Denver, but then they were wanting to dispose of them. Number one, it was costing them $1 million a year to house them under a contract, and they just felt they weren't worth anything, just get rid of them. And we actually got Secretary of Interior to hold off on that disposition for a while. I don't know the status now. Everybody has retired that I had connections with.
Yeah.
To get the back of those photographs in the front and the field sheets. A lot of good information there people don't know about.
Yeah.
USGS.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm not. I don't have a real good answer for your question, other than they do have a big repository building here.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Go for it, Jenna.
Since you said you like history, I want to take 60 seconds and share something with you guys. My grandmother gave me an ancestry book, Descendants, from George Breithaupt. And I took a look at it, and inside is the legal description from my ancestors' property in 1871 in Kansas, signed by President Grant's representative. I live in Florida, so I broke this down in Kansas. It's fractional, so I broke it down. Long story short, I drove to Kansas, jumped a gate, and walked my ancestors' property, 120 acres.
How cool is that? That is cool.
Yeah. So is that a copy of the patent?
I'm not sure. It says, let me see if you can see that.
Yeah.
Is that blurry?
Nope. Yeah. Let's see if we can double click on it.
So Steve, I have my mother's side of the family's original patent on Lynn and Son. I forget which president. It was in the 1870s in central Illinois, Seneca, Illinois, southwest of Chicago. And that family farm now is in the bottom of a nuclear reactor cooling pond at Commonwealth Edison, I think, or something.
What's the,
Patent.
if I could ask the lady, what's the section, township and range on the document?
Section 22, township 14, range 21.
Okay, is the range east or west?
It doesn't say.
Ooh,
I would assume east because it's in Clearfield, Kansas,
Yeah.
which is near Eudora, Kansas, south of Lawrence, Kansas.
yeah, it'd have to be like southeast. That'd be 21 east would be way over in eastern Kansas. So yep, that all makes sense. You know, on Antiques Roadshow, every once in a while, somebody shows up and they have a signature of the president, you know, president signed this and it's a patent. And of course, us old guys know that, well, now we hate to tell you, you know, but the president really didn't sign that. You know, others signed on his behalf. So the folks always go away disappointed that they don't have a signature of the president on the patent.
Yeah.
That's
But
awesome.
I thought that was really special to my heart when I found her property. I went back last month and asked the guy if I could buy it, and he pretty much said get off my land.
What's the date on the document there?
1871.
That would be kind of late in Kansas, but yeah, that's good document.
That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And
Thanks
then,
for letting me share that.
yeah, and Lori put in the chat that you can request the NARA file from that if you wanted to see the whole document. So
How would I do that?
BLM site has all the patents.
Okay, so I do see it.
Janelle, if you want to see things like the evaluation that the inspectors had to do when they went out, they had to interview the neighbors, and he talked about, you know, how do they know that this person is proving up their land? All that stuff is in the NARA file, and it's archives.gov. But
Okay.
unfortunately, they're not doing anything right now. So all you can do is fill out the form and send it in. I think it's $50. We do that when we're doing research for clients. But it's amazing what you can get. And you get the inspector's report where he went out and interviewed the homesteader, and it's really interesting.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate
that would be
that.
cool. That's going to be a great file. That's awesome.
So how many of us got into this profession after we hated history in high school, only to find out that that's the basis of this description and totally love it.
Right. That's awesome. Everybody's shaking their head on that one.
You can't be a good surveyor without being at least, well, you got to be several things. You got to be a detective. You have to be a historian. You have to be a measurer. You have to be a reader. You know, multiple talents to be.
You have to have common sense and ability to solve puzzles.
Yep, absolutely.
That's fun.
Good job, Richard.
Yeah, that was a
Thank
good one.
you.
Anybody have more specific questions they want to ask, or want to share some notes? We can share the notes, like I say, when I do the follow-up email. If you guys want to send them to me, I can kind of get them back out to the group. Or
My email is on those handouts there. If y'all have a question or something I can help with, feel free to send me an email.
and then the other thing I couldn't find. So is it next week or coming up in the next week or two? Your review course?
Yes, it's middle April of 15, 16, 17, something like that. But there's a review course in Missouri, both for the NCWS part, and then there's one day that's a Missouri state specific for those that are taking the Missouri state specific exam.
Gotcha. And that's not till April? I was thinking it was in August. For some reason.
August.
Yeah. Okay.
August.
Yeah. I thought it's coming up here pretty quick, right?
August.
Is there a link for that somewhere?
The MSPS, Missouri Society of Professional Surveyors, would have a link to it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was looking on there and nothing was jumping out to me, but I'll go look harder. Calendar, maybe. Let me try the calendar.
Yeah. Ought to be there.
There it is. Review course. Found it. Okay.
Joe Piva is one of the speakers, the GeoLearn guy, if you all know Joe.
Joe's on right now.
Oh, hi, Joe.
Joe's been joining in the last 3 weeks. So
Good.
it's been great. Yep.
Good.
All right.
Hey, I'm promoting your Wednesday session right now in the chat for these guys.
Oh, good, good.
There you go.
Well, so that I can promote you, Joe, what you speak Monday and Tuesday, is that right?
Yes, that's right. All of Monday, which is the simpler math stuff, which, by the way, I'll be covering on Mentoring Mondays next Monday.
Cool.
Also, and on Tuesday, a variety of topics that afternoon, and Dick has that morning.
Yeah, there's some good stuff. I threw the flyer in the chat. So
Great, thank you.
cool. Any more questions? We want to be respectful of Dr. Elgin's time. There's Joe. Now he's got his camera on. No one? It's quiet.
I have a question.
Ah, there you go, Brad. Go for it.
I'm currently LSIT and I'm not going to be eligible for my PS for 2 or 3 more years yet. But I plan on taking the review course. Do you recommend taking it a few months prior to the PS or the year prior?
Or every year leading up to it.
Yeah.
I knew that
let's
was
be
coming.
real.
Joe, you're more in the review business or course presentation stuff than I. Do you have an answer for that?
I would say it depends. A lot of it has to do with your preparation, your educational background. Keep in mind that the NCAAS exams, the FS and the PS, have a unique flavor to them because you probably know that they're designed for people who have actually gone through a baccalaureate program in surveying. So there could be things that are relatively unfamiliar that may be hard to kind of ingrain in yourself if you only have 2 or 3 weeks before you take the exam. So you might want to go to ncaaas.org and depending on which exam you're taking, download the syllabus that they cover to see how well you have that stuff. Because they give you a little bit of proportions on what topics are covered, how much. For the state-specific exam, you really are best served by talking to people who have taken the exam and talk to more than one. Because if you're talking to people whom you don't know, they may give you a response that may not be appropriate for your background. In other words, you need to get a response from somebody who has about the same professional experience and educational background to kind of judge whether their advice to you is accurate or not. But I tell people, if you have the luxury of time, take the review course a year ahead. And then if you feel like you still need some brush up, you have time. I'm not going to follow Trent's suggestion and say take it every year, but some people benefit taking it twice. I'll say that much. Because we do have repeat takers. I teach the review course in several states, and I see people come back.
And it's great to take it the first time around, right? Just so you, even as a precursor to your studying, because you'll get an idea of what's on the exam and what you really should be studying, and then you'll know what to work on in between, going back to the next year and doing the review course again at that point. So then it's just kind of becoming repetitive at that point, but they're good right up front. So you know what to work on and come up with your own study plan. So
I'll talk about this tomorrow, next week, but
there you go.
The big mistake that people make is they say, well, I've been surveying for 15 years. So, I couldn't possibly have that much to learn other than how to do some of these hand calculations because I do everything on my data collector on my laptop. And that's definitely not a true statement. That doesn't even come close.
That's cool.
The other comment that Joe and I see in the critiques of the review course folks will say, oh, well, one of the advantages here was that I learned what I didn't know, or I didn't realize that vertical curves were part of, the FS exam. And, I'm a boundary person, what do I need to vertical curves? So you find out, have a better opportunity to find out what the scope is. But of course, the scope is published online by NCSS. I mean, you can go read it, and the percent of the exam is published there too. But one reason to take it is to find out what you don't know.
And following along those lines, Brad and the others who are interested, is that a lot of people haven't taken an exam in ages. It may be a long time. And these review courses, whether it's ours or somebody else's, is more than likely going to cover what textbooks you might want to review, how to study, and how to take the exam. In other words, you can get psyched out by an exam and do really badly, even if you're well prepared, if you don't understand the environment, the time pressure, and you don't understand yourself and how you're going to react to those situations. That's why we always recommend, like at our review course, we pass out a sample exam and the solutions, and we say, we're not going to cover it here, but take it home, put all your books away, and take it as a closed book exam and see if you can finish enough on time correctly to get that 70%.
Good stuff.
Brad and any others, look back at Mentoring Mondays session number 2. I go into a method for self-evaluation, looking specifically at these exam plans that are available to you for these different exams, and how to go through those exam plans and be honest with yourself and evaluate the areas that you have education, experience, and training, and the areas that you don't. And if you've been doing hand calculations on horizontal curves for the last decade, which probably nobody on here has been, but right, if that's something that you are completely comfortable with, well, that's not the area to study, right?
Exactly.
So go back to those early sessions on here on Mentoring Mondays, and see the method for the blue and yellow highlighter method. So
Yeah, good stuff, Rob. Anybody? So definitely jump back in next week, Brad. You said this was your first week here. So next week is will be what we call an open session. It's for any of those kind of taking the FS, the PS, or CSTs, or any exams. And like I say, Dr. Pava is going to be talking next week, and so. But and then we've recorded a few open sessions. The first one I think was in May, was our first open one. So it's the first Monday of every month is an open session where it's kind of designed for those taking the exams. So,
and if you have a problem that has been giving you headaches, send it in to us ahead of time so we don't headaches trying to solve it in front of everybody.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say Monday's session is not supposed to be stump the chumps.
Right.
So the more notice we get,
exactly,
the more efficiently we can handle your questions.
Exactly. And I'll do every week I do a follow-up email of the session and kind of talk about what's coming up on the following Monday. So that's your time to kind of chime in there, Brad, or anybody else who wants to jump in. But I know we kind of steered off of the notes section, but anybody come up with any other questions they had for Dr. Elgin before we let him go? We're still back to no. So with that, I appreciate it, Dr. Elgin, for coming in. And we'll definitely hit you back up for the water boundary one, and we'll look at doing something later this year on that. So,
okay. All righty. Well, thanks to everybody. Best of luck to you, and send me an email if you have some specific question. I'll be happy to try to answer it.
Yeah, I'll put your email in the follow-up stuff. So,
very good.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
See you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.